Coming to you on Secular Media Network, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto. Hello and welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I'm your host, Callie Wright, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Daniel Wolfsong.
Hello, lovelies.
Today, we are doing a Gaytheist AMA for you Redditors out there. That's Ask Me Anything. So we put out on our social media to say, hey, you've got a queer trans girl and a cis gay dude willing to answer pretty much anything, and we've got some seriously amazing questions. So let's jump right in. Daniel, the first question.
Okay, this comes from Kessie, and they ask, but what does it mean to feel your gender? Or I guess to not feel like the gender you've been assigned. This goes even further because I really still struggle with understanding non-binary gender. Not that my personal non-understanding of it stops me from doing what I can to support people. I would just like to have a better grasp in my head of the lived experience. Basically, I identify as a woman because I've always been told I'm a woman and society treats me as a woman. But I've been told many times that I'm not very female-like, or that I must have been a male in a past life because I like politics, etc., etc., etc. And I've always fought against the idea that I have to do a certain thing or be a certain way because I'm a woman. But I've obviously never felt the need to change my gender or my body, and I guess that's what I'm looking to understand better. Maybe another way to say it is when a small child who has just barely started to be exposed to gender roles is saying that they want to be a different gender, I feel like there's obviously something else going on there, and that's the part I feel like I'm missing in my understanding. Am I making sense? Do I sound like a horrible trans ally not understanding this? Because I feel like I am. I feel like I'm missing a very basic concept here.
Well, that is a hell of a first question.
It sure is.
So... And I think it's important to preface this by saying that any answer given by Daniel or myself here is prefaced with the fact that our experience may or may not map to the larger experience for gay people or for trans people, or, anything like that. So I don't want anyone to get the impression that either of us feel like we can speak for the community. Mm-hmm. Obviously we're speaking from our own experience and for ourselves, and lots of these things will map to other people's experiences, and there'll be some commonalities there, but definitely just want to put it out there that the answers that we give are not going to be definitive answers, that you're going to get perspective that will match what everyone in the community has to say. So for me, physical dysphoria is really what defines it for me. The gender stuff, when we're talking about the social construct of gender, speaking of, gender roles and, what a woman or what a man is quote unquote supposed to be, I definitely identify pretty strongly with things that are stereotypically feminine in that way when we're talking about gender. But I think if it was just that, I'm not sure I would be able to say that I actually identify as female. For me, it's very much about my body and my uncomfortableness, if that's a word, with my body, and feeling like I should have boobs, or that I shouldn't have a penis, or that I look in the mirror and I have a masculine look to my face, and I don't like that, or that I don't like having facial hair, all the secondary sex characteristics that are dimorphic, sexually dimorphic, which means that they're different between male and female. Those things were the jumping off point really for me to say that transition is a thing that I need to do. there are definitely people who identify as trans who don't feel the need to do physical transition. Some who don't even really change their outward presentation or, pick a new name or ask people to use different pronouns or that kind of stuff. So I don't want to invalidate those folks' identities, but speaking for me, it's a very physical thing. It's not. I mean, it's definitely an identity thing, but it's not just that. It's the physical dysphoria and feeling that sort of the neural map that my brain has for my body doesn't match. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm also thinking that there is a difference between what Kessie was talking about that are more gender roles when
right.
she says that she's not very female-like, things like that. I wonder what exactly she was talking about there, because something that you and I were talking about earlier was that there are plenty of ways that I identify with things that are, quote, womanly, end quote. I never really got into sports. I like things like cross stitch, and I'm kind of a sensitive guy. I never really identified, even when I was growing up, I preferred the hanging out with girls and women more than men, just because I felt that I fit in with them more. But that never affected my experience of my own gender. First of all, I want to preface this by saying I believe gender to be a spectrum, not just one or the other, male or female, but sort of a spectrum.
Oh yeah,
there, just
absolutely.
like sexuality. And I've never felt. First of all, I never really even thought of my experience of gender until I met you, and we started. I started learning more about the trans experience. But when I think about how I feel, I definitely feel male, even though somewhere in the male end of the spectrum of gender identity. I like things that are typically considered feminine, but that doesn't affect my experience of my gender, if that makes sense. So I'm hoping that maybe that might unpack a little bit of what she was asking.
Yeah, well, and I think there's a certain degree to which, if your identity doesn't match your body in that way, there's probably a certain level to which you're just simply not going to be able to understand it. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it's, there are lots and lots of people with lots and lots of different life experiences that I just have zero perspective for because I haven't been through it.
Right.
Everything from, what it's like to live in Europe. You know what I mean? I've never lived in Europe, so I can't speak to that experience. And a certain amount of hearing people talk about it will help me understand it better, but I'm never going to understand it like someone who actually lives there. So I think there's a certain degree to which that's important to know too. Like, there may be a certain level of understanding that's just not possible, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. So, to the last few questions, no, you are not a horrible ally.
Questions are okay. It's okay
yes,
to ask
absolutely.
And to not understand.
Absolutely. Well, and I will say, I don't want to, give anything away, but Kessie is someone that I hold very, very dear, and I love her to death, and she's an amazing trans ally. So,
very cool.
Definitely not a bad ally, and I don't think you're really missing the concept. I think it's just one of those things. There's a certain degree to which you're not going to understand someone else's lived experience because you haven't been through it, and that's okay.
What do you think about small children who begin expressing the idea that they think they might, boys who think that they're actually girls, and they're basically expressing a transgender identity? In her question, she said that they haven't been exposed to gender roles. How do they know that they're the wrong gender? What do you think about that?
Well, again, I think it comes back down to physical things. And again, like, just because that's my experience, that's probably what I'm going to paint onto other things.
Yeah.
But, me personally, like, because if you think about it, kids, before puberty, the only thing you have to do to support a kid if they say, like, look, like, mom, dad, I feel like a girl, when everyone thinks I'm a boy, like, like, really, the worst you're going to have to do is let the kid grow their hair out and wear different clothes and play with different toys.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I mean, different bathrooms at school, maybe. But I mean, even if we're talking about before school. So, like, I mean, what's so drastic about that? You know what I mean? If a kid wants to explore their gender identity, there's literally nothing you're going to do that's irreparable in supporting a kid doing that, because that's so often the argument that you hear, you know, like, oh, the kids are too young to know, blah, blah, blah. Like, you know, well, and I'm not going to say the blanket thing, like, no, kids just know, you know what I mean? Because I mean, I've met young trans people who identified as trans and then later on decided, like, you know what, that actually doesn't fit me. And all of that's okay. And even into puberty, you know, you can take blockers to stop puberty, and nothing that does is irreversible. It just delays puberty. Right. You know, so I mean, you have to get to the point where you're like 16, 17-ish before anything happens that really, really has an irreversible effect. And then, you know, once you're 18, obviously, you know, you can do whatever you want because you're legally an adult then. But I think there's a misconception that when someone says, like, they're supporting their kid through transition, that means, like, they're giving their kids surgery and, you know, giving their kids hormone pills and stuff like that. And that's just not what happens. Not to mention, you know, if you look at the small studies that have been done, when kids are supported in that way, generally speaking, they are otherwise extremely normal people in, you know, when it comes to the risk factors that trans people face with mental illness, you know, depression, anxiety, suicide, that kind of stuff. You know, my understanding is that with the smaller studies that have been done, those things just don't really happen to those kids the way that they happen to trans people like me who transition later in life and do face those kinds of things.
Yeah. That makes sense. So I'm also a big advocate for letting kids sort of experiment with gender as young kids, because first of all, it's something that we want to do naturally. So, but also, again,
well, right. And I mean, if anyone is honest, like, what young kid didn't sort of gender bend things at least a little bit as a kid? You know what I mean? Like, I had conversations with my friends that were like, yeah, like, I'd put on my mom's clothes because I thought it was funny, or because I was curious about what it felt like. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing wrong with that stuff. I mean, that's just exploring, because that's what kids do.
Yeah, it only becomes bad when they're shamed for it and then they grow up with this complex. And that's sort of, we have a cultural complex surrounding that anyway. So, but yeah, exactly. But I think there is a difference between gender roles and gender identity. Gender roles are just arbitrary. Gender identity is something that seems to be more ingrained existing in the brain.
Yeah, and I had somebody share some studies in a group that I was in, and some of them seem to be geared towards, you know, there being evidence of actually a biological basis for gender identity. And I haven't read the studies, so I can't speak to them specifically. But, you know, there apparently is research suggesting that there is a biological basis for gender identity. So that's, you know, something to keep in mind too. If I remember, I'll put the link to that in the show notes.
Cool. Justin asks, female to male trans guys, do they get mastectomies or do breasts shrink?
Okay, so I want to be careful with this one because I'm not a trans guy. I do know plenty of trans guys. The answer is yes to both. My understanding is that testosterone will shrink breasts to a certain degree, and ultimately, a lot of trans guys do choose to get top surgery, where they have their breasts surgically removed. And I have, you know, a couple of friends who have been through that, and it's, you know, as affirming for them as I understand that, you know, bottom surgery and breast augmentation is for the trans women that I know. So,
yeah, the trans guys I know, they've all had top surgery. But yeah, it's really interesting the effect that hormone therapy has on the body.
Interesting is a really, really good word for that.
Yeah, I'll just leave it at that because that's not my realm. But just seeing, just befores and afters, just from without any surgery, just from how hormones affect the body. It's really interesting, I think.
Yeah, in really what it is, it's all fat redistribution. At least in trans women, it redistributes where your body deposits fat. And that it can soften the shape of your face, even though it obviously doesn't change the shape of your skull. But it changes where fat deposits go in your body when you gain and lose weight. So like what you see generally as like the stereotypical differences between the way male and female bodies are shaped. A lot of that is the way fat deposits in the body. So that's an interesting little tidbit.
Cool. All right. Richard asks, do you ever have to go somewhere and say, screw it, I don't want to put up with the possibility of confrontation and just skip the makeup, dress, and accessories? Or do you stay true to yourself?
This is a great question, and honestly, it's something that I've kind of struggled with sometimes, because there are times, especially because I haven't had laser done on my face, when I get up in the morning, the first thing that I do every day is shave, even if I'm not going out anywhere, just because having stubble on my face just absolutely just destroys me. Like I can't handle it. But there are times where I get up and I'm like, I'd go over to my ex's house to let our dogs out sometimes. And sometimes like I have to get up in the morning to do it, and that's all I actually have to do. Like I literally get up and do that and go and come back. And there are definitely times where I get up and I'm like, God, I don't feel like shaving. I don't want to put on a bra. I don't want to put on makeup. Like, could I just like go stealth and guy mode? But then, I'm presenting in a way that makes me feel uncomfortable at that point. So the answer is no. I don't actually ever do that. I always take steps to make myself feel comfortable with me first, and I'll deal with whatever consequences there are as a result of that. And generally speaking, there aren't people around where I live. People stare, of course, because that's what people do, because people are idiots. And I got a someone laughed at me and called me a freak to my face the other night when I was driving home. That was a lot of fun.
Oh, wonderful.
But generally speaking, it's not really something that I have to worry about. So yeah, I always, stay true to myself, and it's not even really a matter of, this defiant, like, F you world kind of thing. It's just that, like, I've put a lot of work into finally becoming comfortable with the way that I present outwardly, and that for me is my priority. Like, I want to look in the mirror and be as close to my ideal self as possible in the way that I present to the world. And, and then I'll move on from there after that.
Right. So it's not so much about whether or not you want to put up with the possibility of being confronted for being trans. You need to feel comfortable in your own skin first, and then it goes out from there. Exactly. Okay. Daniel, another Daniel, not me, asks, what does a successful life of activism look like? What changes in your lifetime will be satisfying? I think we've seen some pretty satisfying changes just in the last month.
Well, right. And I think, because the next question that we have has to do with activism too, so I don't want to step on Bobby's toes, but for me, a successful life of activism is knowing that I did everything I could. Because obviously there are lots of fights that we're fighting that we're not going to win in our lifetimes. And I think if we shoot for that as an expectation, as opposed to an aspiration, if that makes sense, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment and to feel like a failure, For me, the things that I see that give me satisfaction as an activist aren't even necessarily the big things like, wow, gay marriage is legal now, or, things like that. It's little stuff like somebody sending me an email to say that something that I said on the show helped them. Or, giving somebody some new perspective, or making somebody feel less alone, like little personal things like that, personal interactions where somebody says something like, I learned something because of listening to your show, or, that kind of stuff. That's honestly what victory looks like for me every time when somebody says stuff like that. For me, that's where I really feel like, that something that I have done has been successful. Obviously, there are big things that I want to see change. Like, I would love to see a Civil Rights Act style piece of legislation that covers sexual orientation and gender identity on a federal level. We don't have that. I would love to see ENDA, the Employer Non-Discrimination Act, that includes gender identity and sexual orientation. I would love to see that passed. I would love to see schools with enumerated anti-bullying policies that cover gender identity and sexual orientation. I definitely want to see those kinds of things. But the more personal stuff is the stuff that really gets, because that's just kind of who I am. Like, I'm a people person. So when I'm interacting with someone and they say that they've gotten something out of that interaction, that's what the victories that are the most satisfying to me.
Yeah, the small victories that happen on an interpersonal level. Just when someone tells you that, they used to think this way, and they used to think in a way that was bigoted or closed-minded, and then just for them to say, "Oh, you've changed my mind on that." That's how the cultural tide changes, just one person at a time, and that person sharing information with someone else, and then that person changing their mind, and it just happens kind of on an organic level like that.
Yeah, I was just going to say organically. That's probably the best word to describe it.
Mm-hmm. And it's a lot like life too. There are things that are super important on a big level, and then there are things that they're still very important, but they happen on smaller, more granular levels. And like you were saying, that one person who sends you a message saying, "I feel like I can begin to be a person now." That may not be important to the world, but it's important to us when they're saying that because of something that we've said or something that you've said to somebody. That's very important because, of course, the big picture matters, but people individually matter too.
Well, right. The big picture is made up of tons and tons of little small pictures.
Right.
If we want to get meta about it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
All right. So we're going to take a quick break real quick. More questions coming up on the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Here's an excerpt from Disproving Christianity by David G. McAfee.
Each argument and contradiction presented will bring us closer to disproving the main pillars of Christianity, using nothing more than logical thinking, statistics, scientific and historical data, and Holy Scriptures. The debates between Christians and non-Christians have raged for thousands of years, and I expect the conflict to continue. But I do hope that these arguments will allow those Christians who may not have questioned biblical fallibility in the past to realize that these texts are man-made, and they represent the ideas of those fallible individuals who created and edited the compilation of texts now considered to be the Holy Bible. They contain errors, contradictions, and a stagnant moral code which, in many ways, no longer coincides with the morality of modern man. What I hope to gain from presenting these arguments and little-known biblical passages to the reader is a sense of understanding of Scripture which may not be presented in Bible study or in church, and for good reason. If read with an open mind, I truly believe that this book will open people's eyes to the wonders of free thought in a way that other works utilizing a more philosophical approach cannot.
Disproving Christianity and Other Secular Writings by David G. McAfee is now available at atheistaudiobooks.com.
And before we jump back into the show, it's time to thank our patrons. Thank you all so much for believing in us enough to contribute to us financially and for being a part of this movement. Patrons of the Gaytheist Manifesto have access to all sorts of cool stuff, like a big shout out on the show, premium content, including an audio journal I've decided to keep documenting the more personal stuff I don't dive into on the show, and an exclusive patrons-only hangout once a month. If you're so inclined, head over to patreon.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto to become a part of this movement and support the show. Thank you. Welcome back to the Gaytheist Manifesto. Today we're doing the Gaytheist AMA. Had a whole bunch of people submit questions, and we're just rolling with it. So, Daniel, what do we got next?
All right, Bobby C. asked a question that's similar in scope to the last question, which is, it is one thing to say you're an activist, but what, in your opinion, does it mean to actually be an activist?
Bobby C., one of my favorite human beings on the planet, by the way. God, do I love that man. So we did an episode about this once, like, you know, what is activism and what does activism look like? But it's definitely worth, I think, you know, taking a second look at the topic. So obviously the root word of activist is act, right? Mm-hmm. So the way that I look at it is anyone who takes any action on behalf of a cause, I think, can claim themselves to be an activist. And I think as simple as, you know, engaging people in Facebook discussions. A lot of people like to poo-poo on that, like it's useless and it doesn't solve anything. I know I've had, you know, positions on major issues reversed because of discussions on Facebook.
Me too.
You know, I've had people who've told me they've changed their mind because of something that I've said to them on Facebook. Mm-hmm. You know, there are lots of people whose minds are not going to be changed by those things, but I don't think that it's a useless enterprise. You know, I mean, Matt Dillahunty on the Atheist Experience says all the time, you know, if you think debating religion is useless, you should see my email inbox. You know, people say to them all the time, like, I started questioning because of something I heard on your show, and lo and behold, here, you know, 6, 8, 10 months, a year later, I'm an atheist now.
Yes.
You know, there are plenty of people I know who know and love me who will say at one point they used to be super bigoted against gay and trans people, but, you know, they had some kind of revelation that was because of something someone said, something they saw that, you know, made them change their mind. And like I said, sometimes it's as simple as just a conversation with another person. And I don't think we should discount those things. Obviously, going to protests, holding up signs, lobbying Congress, all that sort of stuff. I mean, that stuff all counts too. Like, it's all important, I think. So I think, I mean, if you're doing what you can, where you can, with the talents you have and the resources that you have, that's what activism is. And I don't think the problem is that people aren't activist enough. I just think there aren't enough people doing it. Yeah.
I agree. Because I'm not really concerned at all with whether or not someone calls themselves an activist. I don't, you know, if someone says that they are, which, you know, let's be honest, it's a bit rare to hear someone just sort of introduce themselves as an activist.
Hello, I'm activist Callie Wright.
Right. So, I totally agree with you. I think activism takes many, many forms, and from, you know, sharing information to doing a show like we do, to going out and protesting, to picketing. It takes all kinds of forms. And I think that we're so used to the image of, you know, folks in front of the White House picketing a law or, you know, doing a protest. That's sort of the picture that we have in our heads, I think, culturally. That's one aspect of it, sure. But I agree with you in that it's what are you actually doing to bring about the message that you think is important into public consciousness.
Right, because, for example, I mean, people say stuff to me all the time like, you know, you're so brave for being out there with your story, and being open and vulnerable, and that is a difficult thing to do. And I mean, it was definitely something I had to work up some courage to do for the very first time. Obviously, it's not a big deal now because it's something that I do all the time. But, when people say stuff like that to me, I think of like, what about people who are doing LGBT activism in countries where being gay can incur the death penalty? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? My activism is nothing compared to that, Yeah. But, and I don't think it's actually healthy to make those comparisons, but I just, wanted to there are levels to everything. And I don't think, I don't really do anything to contribute because all I do is talk to people on Facebook. I think that can still be important if that's something you're passionate about and that's, how you contribute, then, go for it. Like, I'm not going to, drag anybody down over that.
Well said. Kayla asks, can you describe what it is like going from a place of privilege in America to a minority? What personal reflections come from that change? Did it make you more empathetic to other minority groups?
Oh boy. The answer to the last question is absolutely yes. Because I used to hold some views that I recognize now to be incredibly racist. And it took people acting in that way towards me because of being trans for me to recognize that. And that's something I'm not super proud of. I should have been able to recognize that because, I've always been a person who, I don't, judge people based on their race and that kind of stuff, but you can still hold seriously problematic views on race and have that attitude. Mm-hmm. So what would happen is I would go into discussions where trans issues are being discussed, and I would kind of raise my hand and say, hey, like, actual trans person here, so here's what, the deal is, at least in my experience, and everybody would be telling me how I was supposed to handle my experience and what my experience is and is not, even though they literally have no perspective for it. And then I would go into conversations about race, and I would see white people doing the same thing to black people. Mm-hmm. And I was like, hey, wait a minute. So yeah, I mean, the reason why I am as passionate as I am about racial equality now is because I was finally able to see that from the other side, not the side of being a victim of racism, because I've never been a victim of racism, but just being able to see what it's like on the other side of being a majority group, and how privilege can blind people to those experience. And as far as what it's like going from a place of privilege to a minority, something that I always tell people is that if you want to understand what male privilege is, ask a trans woman.
Yes.
I mean, and at least someone who's, lived part of their adult life pre-transition. Because we, generally speaking, know what it's like to have male privilege and lose it. I used to be in a Facebook group that was for people who were into recording engineering and stuff. And when I joined as a female, my contributions were no longer automatically seen as valid. It was, I would say something and it would just be dismissed, or, I would have to work to prove that I knew what I was talking about instead of having it just assumed that I knew what I was talking about.
Right.
And I mean, that's happened in discussions surrounding religion and all of that sort of stuff too. Like, people automatically assume that as a guy, a lot of times that you know what you're talking about. And as a woman, I have to work much harder to prove that, like, no, I actually do know what I'm talking about when it comes to this kind of thing. Like, it's not just the default position. Like, you have to work harder to prove yourself. And, and that goes because, I mean, I have a technology-based job. People who actually read me as a woman and treat me that way, they don't assume that I know what I'm talking about with technology. People will, I have people on the phone telling me basic networking stuff when they're calling tech support to get help with their internet. Different stuff like that. And having people approach you sexually sometimes aggressively. That never happened to me before I was a woman on the internet. And it's happened to me on the phones at work too, and kind of in person too. Online dating sites are an absolute nightmare to be a woman on. Especially a trans woman, because, if you don't put that you're trans on your profile and you tell somebody while you're talking, you get called a trap, quote unquote, which is this awful term that people use for when trans women try to trick men into sleeping with them, quote unquote.
Because that's such an epidemic in our society.
Well, because it's such an awful thing to have sex with a trans person.
Yes.
So when you don't put it in your profile and they find out later, you're a trap. When you do put it in your profile, you either get no messages, or you become a fetish object, or a circus freak, and someone will message you just to let you know how gross they think you are for being trans. And this happens all the time.
Yeah.
And then, I've had people on the phones at work, ask, like, this guy told me how much he thought I weighed, what he thought my hair color was, that he thought I was the prettiest girl on the call center, that he bet I was stacked.
Wow.
And, this is a guy who's calling me to fix his phone.
Right.
And, I had another guy ask me if I liked older men, asked me if I'd come to his house when my shift was over.
Jeez.
Stuff like that never happened to me before, and it's super, super jarring to have that happen. And as far as what personal reflections came from that change, it definitely made me reflect on privilege that I used to have that I don't anymore, but it also made me reflect on privilege that I still have that might be causing me blind spots when it comes to things like race. So I'm definitely a lot more sensitive now when I have a person of color say something that makes me uncomfortable about race. My gut reaction is to check my privilege instead of to push back and say, well, you're wrong. This doesn't sound right to me. My gut reaction is, why does this make me feel uncomfortable? Like, am I running up against a blind spot that's caused by my privilege? So it's, personal reflections, and definitely made me more empathetic to other minority groups. Let me ask you, Daniel, because I know you said you got picked on a lot at school just because people thought you were gay, even though you weren't out.
Mm-hmm.
So was there an experience of that, of a loss of privilege once you came out as gay?
Yes. And I think that I never really, I had accepted that I was gay before I really began, dating guys. So, I did find out that in some situations it's not a good idea to just hold hands with my boyfriend, unless we want to put up with verbal abuse or worse.
And let me ask if I can, did you date girls when you were in high school at all?
Yes. Into my 20s, actually.
Okay. So you knew what it was like to be able to be sort of romantic in public, like you could kiss somebody on the cheek or hold their hand without having to think twice about it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And something that I've realized is another thing and this is something that people, straight folks may not even think about because you always think about gay people as when did you come out? And the thing about being gay is you have to come out every time you meet someone new. Unless you're being introduced as, the boyfriend. But I had experiences.
This is Daniel. He's my gay.
Yeah. Well, when my boyfriend introduced me to his friends, obviously they know that I'm gay.
Right.
They probably at least hope that I am. But,
right.
But, I went to a party once and, my neighbor just invited me to this St. Patty's Day party she was having. And I was like, yeah, sure. I'll come by because it was 2 doors down. And I came by and, met her husband and his friends, and they were giving me shots. We were having a good time until they asked me if I had a girlfriend or a wife. And at that time I said, no, actually I'm gay. And they wanted nothing to do with me after that. Because I think in their mind, they're like, oh my God, we've been doing shots with this dude and he's probably just thinking about how much he wants us or I mean, who knows what they were thinking, but suddenly they just wanted to have nothing to do with me anymore. They all kind of scattered, and I literally mean they scattered. Like all
Right.
four of them just went to, so they're like, oh, I'm gonna go over here and do this thing. And this kind of goes into the question earlier, are you true to yourself all the time? And what I found is that I have no problem telling people that I'm gay, but yeah, it does affect me sometimes. I worry, I've worried about how employers would act toward me once they found out. Just customers and clients in general. Is this going to change their desire to work with me just because they know that I'm gay? Things like that. It's a really tricky line to walk, because I want to be open about who I am, but I also know that, there's a balance that I have to strike.
Well, right. And, when you think about, job stuff and client relationships and that kind of thing, like, someone's first reaction might be, well, why does that have to come up at work and in client relationships? And I mean, the general, the general answer is like, well, no, it doesn't have to, but that doesn't change it from actually coming up, because people will say something like, if you're working really hard at work, boy, bet you wish they had some time off so you could go spend time with your girlfriend, huh? Stuff like that.
99% of the time, it's coming from them. Like, they're the ones bringing it up.
Right, and it forces you to have that conversation. It's not like you're like yes, I'm gay, I'm an activist, and I want everyone to know that I'm gay. Like it's not like that.
Yeah, like that St. Patty's Day party. I didn't burst through the door and say, "Here I am, Daniel, homosexual." I was actually happy for sexuality to not come up at all until they happened to ask me
right.
about a girlfriend.
And just want to do some shots and have some snacks and
yeah, have some fun. So, but that was one of those things where, any gay person can attest to this. When you're asked that question, you know that you can do one of two things. You can sort of avoid what they're asking and just say, oh, no, I'm not dating. No, I don't have a girlfriend. Or you can actually be honest and say, even though I don't, currently have a relationship, I am gay. So, just letting them know this aspect of, it's like, I want you to know who I actually am. I don't want to avoid the question by being sort of telling like a live omission type thing.
Right. Just saying, no, I don't have a girlfriend.
Yeah, because that's the easy.
And by the way, never will.
Yeah, never will. That's the easy way to answer that question, and that's very tempting sometimes. But
right, and I mean, I'm just like I've said before, I've done that.
Yeah.
Like no, just I don't have a boyfriend.
Yeah. Because I don't want that, because then you're kind of setting yourself up to be to paint yourself in a corner if they continue asking you probing questions, and then it comes out that, oh, you're actually gay and you were just sort of avoiding, you were somehow for some reason lying about it. So I mean,
right. Why didn't you tell me?
Yeah.
You trying to hide it?
I can say that being gay and becoming interested and active in the world of LGBT rights has definitely opened my eyes to being more compassionate toward other minority groups, like the Black Lives Matter movement. I can never understand what it's like to be a black person, but there are some situations where being gay has given me more insight, where I could say, you know what? I can understand why, like, this one particular group of black people, I understand why they did this, because I'll just give you an example that'll make it easier to explain what I'm saying. Some time ago, there was a meeting, and this was a Black Lives Matter meeting, and the black people who went there didn't want any white people to be around in this one specific meeting. And a lot of the knee-jerk reaction to that from white folks was, well, that's racist, they're excluding. And my thought to that was, as a gay person, I can understand why they would only want it. Let's say we had a meeting like that for the gay rights movement. I can understand there being a meeting that was only, that they only wanted gay people and not straight people around, because when you know that it's just gay people, there's no fear of, I can be myself, I can speak freely, I don't have to edit and censor myself because I might, for fear of offending a straight person in the room. So I can understand that. So being gay definitely gives me insight that I may not have had into, I guess, just being a minority. So,
well, the idea is that you want to create a safe space because, you know, the general idea of, you know, a quote unquote safe space is that you want to create a space where there's no one who's above you in the privilege hierarchy there.
Right. Exactly.
And I mean, that can sound like a really crappy and, you know, exclusionary thing to say, but, you know, when I go to a transgender support group, I don't want people there who aren't trans.
Exactly. Yeah.
And, you know, if I'm going there, you know, specifically to get support surrounding that, like, that's not a person, one, who's likely to be in a position to give me advice. And, you know, two, maybe a person who has problematic attitudes, you know, that may be, you know, perfectly well-meaning, but, you know, the idea is to create a safe space where there are only other people who have this certain experience there. And I don't begrudge anyone that.
Right. And it's also, it can be really difficult to be open and vulnerable in a space where there are people there who don't really understand, who don't have the experience that you're coming from. It can be stressful and kind of hard to navigate that. Like, you know, if I'm talking about experiences that I've had as a gay person, experiencing homophobia, if I know that the guy sitting right in front of me is a straight guy, it's going to be a lot more difficult to talk about because, you know, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I don't want to offend this guy. I don't want for him to get ideas about me that he's going to apply to all gay people that might be problematic. So, I mean, yeah, I definitely understand that.
Cool. So next up.
All right. This one comes from Tim. Each of us are...
you're skipping other Daniel.
The headline. I'm not familiar with this headline. Can you
Okay.
talk? He said the question is, what did you think of this headline in satire? And he gave a link.
Okay.
Have you looked at that one?
Oh yeah. So the headline is Tony Romo practicing for first time since surgery. And, of course, what this leads you to believe is that Tony Romo had some sort of football-related surgery that he is recovering from and practicing for the first time. And, of course, the big joke is that the surgery Tony Romo actually had was that he had an ovarian cyst removed. And the big, you know, humor thing throughout this entire article is talking about all of Tony Romo's female parts and how... you know, there was a threat to Tony Romo's female parts during the surgery to remove his ovarian cysts. And, you know, my question is, like, so let's unpack why that's funny. Like, literally, think for a second, why is that funny? Because the only thing that I can think of is that, it's funny to call a man a woman.
Right.
And... that's not funny to me.
I've seen a lot of jokes like that where, you know, a picture of Mitt Romney just in makeup, and that's the whole joke.
Oh yeah, there was one going around with Vladimir Putin that way too.
Yeah, and I do the same thing. I ask people why is this funny, because the only joke that I'm seeing is that this is a man who is being portrayed either as a woman or as a cisgender woman, or there's some sort of trans joke in there. And is it funny just because they're being made to look like a trans person? Is it funny just because they're being made to look like a woman? Is it funny just because they're being made to look like they're in a gay situation? If that's where the humor is, maybe you should rethink, that.
Like, and I get, you know, what people say is that, you know, especially in the Vladimir Putin thing, people would say, like, well, it's funny because he would find it insulting.
Yeah, that's pointing to a problematic mindset still.
Well, right, exactly. So, you know, gender-based insults aren't funny, just generally speaking. Calling a man a woman or a woman a man, just not funny. And if you can use that as an insult to one person, it's an insult to every person you can apply it to. That's how insults work. If it's an insult for a man to look like a woman or for a woman to look like a man, it's an insult for everyone that statement applies to, not just people you don't like.
Right.
And that's why I really, really hate it when people make me defend Ann Coulter.
I hear that one all the time. How she's really a man, you know.
Yeah, look at her Adam's apple.
And I mean, and I think it's hard. It's a little uncomfortable when you first start unpacking the humor in that because, I've laughed at jokes that,
Oh yeah,
like that
me too. And
until
this is definitely not me claiming that I've never made these jokes and that I've
Right.
never made and that I've never found those jokes funny. It definitely took a sort of consciousness building, consciousness elevating sort of thing for me to recognize what was problematic about this stuff, and then I just stopped finding it funny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, once you think about it and see what it's really pointing to, you realize that what you're laughing at is a whole swath of people being insulted and being made the butt of a joke. So,
Yeah,
that's not too funny.
Exactly. So we're going to take another quick break, and we will be right back with more Gaytheist AMA on the Gaytheist Manifesto.
The staff of Secular Coalition for America lobbies U.S. Congress on issues of separation of church and state, and they've become a powerhouse for change in the United States government. You'll definitely want to subscribe to receive their email action alerts. These are updates for important issues and ones that you can get involved with directly. And hopefully, you'll consider making a contribution to the Secular Coalition for America to help them continue fighting for your equality. You can do it all at secular.org.
Today in school, I learned a lot. In chemistry, I learned that no one likes me. In English, I learned that I'm disgusting. And in physics, I learned that I'm a loser.
Today in school, I learned that I'm ugly and useless. And in gym, I learned that I'm pathetic and a joke. In history, I learned that I'm trash.
Today in school, I learned that I have no friends. In English, I learned that I make people sick. And at lunch, I learned that I sit on my own because I smell. In chemistry, I learned that no one likes me.
In biology, I learned that I'm fat and stupid. And in math, I learned that I'm trash.
The only thing I didn't learn in school today
The only thing I didn't learn today
The only thing I didn't learn
is why no one ever helps.
Kids witness bullying every day. They want to help, but they don't know how. Teach them how to stop bullying and be more than a bystander at stopbullying.gov.
Welcome back to the Gaytheist Manifesto. Today we are continuing with Gaytheist AMA. Had a whole bunch of people ask a bunch of great questions, and we are answering them as we go. So, Daniel, what do we got next?
Okay, Tim asks, each of us are complex people with a variety of interests, desires, fears, goals, etc. Although most people don't want to be defined by a single thing or single issue, we all have things that take priority in our lives. For example, I am an atheist, but I don't want to be known as Tim the Atheist. I don't want to be one-dimensional to the exclusion of all the other things that make me who I am. My question, as an LGBTQ activist, how much has your transition dominated or defined you, and as a person, at least in the eyes of others? Has it changed since you began the podcast? I don't know if I'm asking the question in the right way. Do you think or worry that the rest of the person you are gets overshadowed by this single aspect of your life?
God, that is a fantastic question.
It really is. I love that one.
So yeah, I mean, that is something that I worry about. It's not something that I've seen that happens, that has happened, generally speaking. But it is something that I worry about. I don't want everyone to just think of me as the trans person, I'm a giant Star Trek nerd. I love music. I love audio production. I love technology. I care about my friends. I care about my family. I like to have fun. I like to play video games. I like going to concerts, all that sort of stuff. I mean, those things are all important parts of me too. I wish that being trans was a less important part of me. I wouldn't put it that way. I wish that I didn't have to, worry so much about, getting health care or, having people say mean things to me in public or having, people that I know attempt suicide or be successful at suicide. But those are things that that people in my community face, and that certain things that I face that I just can't avoid. So those things sort of have to define my life, because there's no escaping them. I could, if I wanted to, I guess I could sort of fade out of the community and, do my best to live in stealth and to not even tell anyone ever that I'm trans. And there are people that choose to do that, and I don't have any, I don't have any problem with that if that's how someone chooses to live their life. Generally speaking, I've found that, people want to have these conversations because, especially in the atheist community, what I found, the vast majority of the time, people want to have these conversations and people want to learn and people want to ask questions, and that's amazing. But after that's over with, people are just content to just have regular human being conversations. I was on a show called The Atheist Nomads not too long ago, and I love those guys. And the show was a lot of fun. We had a really great talk about trans stuff. And then, without getting TMI, one of the hosts that I found that we had we'll just say we had a similar set of interests. and after we stopped recording, we stayed on the Skype call talking for like a half hour about that kind of stuff. And we've talked a bunch on Facebook since then. And, a lot of people meet me because of the podcast, or because I'm on another podcast, and that's kind of how they find out about me as a person. But, generally speaking, it's not like, oh, hey, Callie, I want my entire relationship with you to be defined by the fact that you're trans and I want to know things. You know what I mean? I haven't really ran into too much of that, but I will say that is definitely something that I worry about and something that I'm sure will happen at some point. But, generally speaking, it's not something that I've ran too much into. What about you, Daniel? Do you find, do you find yourself worrying about being defined as, gay guy Daniel?
Yes, to a degree. I wanted to just say, first of all, that I think humans just automatically, we want to label each other. That's just our nature. And we want to label each other based on our experiences with each other. So, my mailman, I may never learn their name. They'll always be the mailman.
That's a great way to put it.
They'll always be the mailman because I don't know anything else about them. So if Tim has a voice, has a platform where he talks about atheist stuff, people who only know him through that platform are going to probably think of him as Tim the atheist. But like with you, Callie, I don't know you as Callie the trans activist. I know you as Callie the amazing person who I can have late night deep conversations with and who gives amazing hugs and who I can talk to about anything and who is really good with audio stuff and helps me out with that kind of thing, who also happens to be a trans activist. So I think that when it comes to being one-dimensional, people who they're going to, if all you talk about is loving pizza, people are going to, attribute that label to you. So,
right.
Or video games or what have you. I think that's just a natural thing. So I think that, it really just depends on how close you are to the person and what they know about you. This is sort of difficult territory to navigate for me because I'm worried that I'm articulating it in a way that comes off the wrong way. But do I want to be known as Daniel the gay guy? No, I don't. That's not to say that I don't want people to know that I'm gay. I don't need them to know that I'm gay, but it's something I just want to make it clear that's not something that I'm trying to hide. But it's obviously it's not the first thing they need to know about me.
Because visibility is important.
Yes, visibility is important, and there are plenty of situations where I do want the fact that I'm gay to be known, so that I can be a gay voice in this conversation. But yeah, that said, I don't want to be introduced as Daniel the gay guy in most cases, and I hope that it's not the most interesting thing about me.
Right.
So yeah, that's sort of my experience with that. But I want Tim to maybe get the idea that people are going to do that anyway. They're going to label you only as to the dimension that they know you. So that's more of a them thing than a you thing. In my opinion.
Oh, that's a good way to put it. It's more of a them thing than a you thing.
Yeah.
I like that.
Cool. Ari asks us, devil's advocate question. What makes transgender people different from so-called transracial people like Rachel Dolezal or transspecies people who believe they are non-human animals stuck in human bodies?
Well, I will say, especially when we're talking about people like Rachel Dolezal, it is pretty obvious that she was lying purposely to gain position. Not that it was a matter of identity, but that she just wanted this thing and she wanted to create this identity, so she purposely lied to get it.
Well, what if she didn't lie? What if she really did identify very strongly with black culture, being a white woman? Does that mean that transracialism or transrace, or however you would say that, does that mean that that's actually something that we should give credit to as being a legitimate identity?
Well, and that's the tough question, because the last thing that I want to do is police someone's subjective experience of their own identity, because people do that shit to me all the time, and it enrages me, and it enrages me when I see people do it to others. However, I will say that there's lots of good evidence that gender identity and all of those sorts of things have a biological basis, and that those are, conditions that that can be looked at objectively, and and we can see that those things have real effects, and they've been studied, and that kind of stuff. If someone says, like, I'm a black person trapped in a white person's body, I'm probably not going to have that visceral, like, that's really stupid, you're an idiot, you should stop kind of reaction. But I am absolutely skeptical of that, specifically for that reason.
Yeah, and also I think when I think of the Rachel Dolezal situation, when it comes to what she did, you're talking about adopting cultural elements, right? Adopting them, appropriating them. I don't think it really goes any deeper than that. I can't say that there's any sort of biological phenomenon happening in the brain that informs race.
Yeah, well, and I guess
it's really it's really a cultural question, I think.
Right, and I guess I should say that for people listening in archive who may have not, who this story may not be current. Rachel Dolezal is the person who basically lied about her cultural and racial background to gain position in the racial equality movement, and made it to be the president, I think, of the Washington chapter of the NAACP. So that's, for context there. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, as far as I know, there's not really any sort of documented psychological phenomenon that's been studied that shows this kind of thing like there is for transgender people. Because the fact that it hasn't been studied doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. I'm definitely not saying that, but I'm saying that I'm pretty immediately skeptical of it, specifically for that reason.
Yeah, and I don't see any ways that it's just not superficial cultural adaptations. Aside from actual physical characteristics, I can't say that there's anything in the human brain that says, okay, let's say a person is an African. There's nothing in their brain that's saying, therefore, I have to dress and speak a certain way, or wear my hair a certain way.
Because that was going to be my next question. I mean, do these folks claim to experience physical dysphoria because of it? Like, the way I experience dysphoria because my penis shouldn't be there. Like, do they experience the same thing because their skin is white when it should be black? Maybe, and that's the other thing. I mean, I'm not sure that I've ever heard a person actually claim to be that didn't very obviously have an agenda.
Yeah.
Obviously there were people on Twitter saying that specifically because they wanted to invalidate trans people. And
also she was being very dishonest about her roots. She was lying about her parents.
Exactly.
So, I mean, these are all things that when you add them up, and unfortunately I heard this, well, if trans people get to say that they're transgender, then Rachel Dolezal gets to say she's transracial. There's no difference. I think there actually are a lot of differences.
There's a gigantic, gaping maw, freaking hole of a difference.
Because, the transgender experience is more than just saying, well, I want to be this today. or
exactly.
Or I relate more to this than this. Therefore, they make it sort of into like a whimsical type thing, which it's that's a dangerous lie to believe.
Exactly, and I would have to say the same thing for the trans species thing. Again, someone's identity is someone's identity. I'm not sure how much actual evidence there is that this is a thing.
Well, species means something.
Well, right, and species definitely has a far more specific definition than gender does. That's for sure.
DNA.
Right.
For one.
So, again, I'm not one to just tell someone like, well, that's how you identify, so therefore you're an idiot. I'm definitely not going to do that. But again, I'm skeptical of that sort of thing for the same reason.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not hurting anyone and once you act like a tiger, as long as you're not, hurting anyone and, actually going out and mauling people, those things tigers do. Just
right. Just doing tiger
stuff. No, I think, do your thing. But if you get down to it, again, this isn't something that you can compare to being transgender because, first of all, like I said earlier, species actually has a definition. It's not just, I feel like I might be canine, even though I have human DNA. That's not exactly how it works. So I think that these are more superficial layers of identity, whereas gender does exist as a biological thing in the human brain and in the human body. So,
I agree.
Okay. Ari also asks, and on a serious one, what is your take on Christian, queer, and or trans people? Many non-religious people think it's absurd that they would continue to take part in a religion whose holy text explicitly calls for their death and eternal torture. And, of course, a religion that is the main source of anti-queer bigotry and oppression in this country. Christian queers and their sympathizers, though, say that they believe in a loving and accepting God and seek to reform the religion from the inside. Do you think Christian queers do more harm than good by participating in and legitimizing a group that is often oppressive to them? Or is it a good thing in the vein of, quote, having agents on the inside?
This is something that I actually kind of struggle with and sort of go back and forth on, honestly. Because, before I'm an atheist or anything else, I'm a humanist first. Mm-hmm. And my philosophy is very much people first and evidence-based solutions to problems and love people, lift people up, support people. And if someone is religious and doing all of those things, I really don't care about our religious disagreements that much. Mm-hmm. I do in the fact that I still think, atheism is the intellectually correct position. But, at that point, we're arguing over stuff that doesn't really matter because whatever their religious beliefs are don't have an actual impact, a negative impact on the way that they treat people or the way that they navigate the world. So I definitely have far less argument with people like that. On the intellectual side of things, I definitely see that. Obviously, the Bible says, gay people deserve death. We went over that in episode 1 with David Fitzgerald. But the thing to remember is that when we're talking about religious indoctrination, being the member of a minority group does not make you less susceptible to religious indoctrination. Right. Because let's remember, the Bible says everyone deserves eternal torture. Mm-hmm. Unless you fall on your knees and praise Jesus. You know what I mean? So, obviously in the Bible things are better if you're white, cis, straight, Christian, that kind of stuff.
And male.
But oh yeah, wow, I totally left the male part out. But the Bible also says that you deserve hell simply because you are a human being.
Right.
So it really does say that kind of stuff about everybody. And my fear is holding queer or trans people or even women to an unfair standard, saying like, well, you should be more immune to religious indoctrination than other people are. Because I think that's an unfair standard to hold people to.
It's very unfair.
And then the other side of that is that, queer and trans people deal with a lot in this world. And, some people do turn to religion strictly for comfort. You know what I mean? There are plenty of religious people out there who haven't given a ton of thought to the intellectual position, and all they know is that it helps them cope and it makes them feel okay with themselves. And, I would rather somebody have that and be alive than not have that and commit suicide. And that's not saying that that's not saying that atheists don't have hope or anything like that. But I'm saying, if that particular person's hope for their life hinges on their religion, I'm not willing to just pull the rug out from under somebody like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'd rather take that person and just help them be happy and help them cope and help them deal with whatever's going on and be okay in life. And then, maybe we can have the religious conversation after that, but that's a less important, that's a less important thing to me.
Yeah. I really relate to a lot of what you're saying here. And that's probably one reason why I've really, when I've talked about atheism with certain friends, I've often been asked, well, are you an anti-theist? Because it sounds like you are. Because in a lot of ways, I do think that even if there are queer folks who are Christians who are promoting the more positive aspects of their religion, they're still plugged in to a very problematic belief system that I think is not. I think that at its most effective, it's probably not necessary, but on its worst, it actually is destructive to society. So, but then, like you, if the promise of heaven is all someone's got, if that's all they've got in this world, I don't feel good about bursting that bubble, and I don't see any good that could come of me doing that. I would like for those people to believe that there's a big, beautiful world out here that they could explore in this lifetime, maybe without putting so much emphasis on what happens after this lifetime. But that's why I can't be quote unquote militant about being an anti-theist, because, like you said, I don't want to be the one dissolving with someone's last shred of hope. That said, yeah, I do think religion, and in all religion, I think that I don't think that it is elevating our species or progressing our species. I think it's to the contrary. I think it's keeping our species cemented on this specific dimensional level, to the past and to anti-scientific progress or anti-scientific views. So I guess that's how I feel about it. It's a really hard thing to unpack.
Well, yeah, and I definitely do recognize. I mean, obviously, the root of religion is the belief that faith is a way to know things, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the root thing that all religions share in common. Well, maybe not some fringe religions, but the religions that actually influence, world politics and that kind of stuff. Like, the general idea is that faith is a good way to know things. And I think that idea has to be undermined.
Yes.
But
and also that there's a God who is judging mankind based on whether or not they accept salvation, or whether or not they accept that they are useless, miserable creatures who need to be saved because of some concept called sin. I think that's a terrible way to navigate the human experience.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, and like I said, at the beginning of the question, you are born human, therefore default you are terrible.
Right. So when that's your sort of like humanistic self-esteem, yeah, of course you're going to be able to point to other people you don't like and say, well, you're an awful person because I know that I'm awful because I'm a human being. Therefore, you must be awful too because you're actually doing all these things that my God says you're not supposed to do. They're sort of already starting at that awful baseline, and it doesn't seem like it can get much better from there. So I think it's a very dangerous mentality to live by.
I agree.
Okay, Donna asks us, imagine a time where the social constructs of gender roles no longer existed. So women could shave their heads, be muscular, wear the same things as men. Men could wear dresses, men could wear dresses, makeup, heels, etc. The idea of gender-specific hobbies and traits existed no longer, and everyone shared all of these things. Do you think people would be worried about the labels of and physical attributions of sexuality and gender identity?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I think the answer is probably more simple than it sounds. I think the answer to the question is people would be far less concerned, but for trans people like me, the primary concern is that the neural map of my brain doesn't match the way that my body is laid out, and everything else is kind of secondary. So, generally speaking, I think people would absolutely be far less worried about that. And, I hesitate to say this because, it reflects a problematic attitude, but, it's true. Sometimes people do those things to shock people. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a boy and I'm going to wear a dress because F the world. You know what I mean? And, I don't have a problem with that. You know what I mean? Like, if that's what someone wants to do because they want to shake up, I am 100% in favor of shaking up, the status quo in that way. Things like that definitely wouldn't happen if people didn't care. So I think it would still be a thing, but to a far less degree, I think is really the answer.
And also, I think what's important to note here is that the engine that drives our prejudices about, wandering beyond the very strict lines of gender expression is that we consider women to be inferior to men. It's not so much that if you're a man, you're supposed to do manly things, and if you're a woman, you're supposed to do womanly things. It's very much rooted in, men are better than women and should never debase themselves to be like women. And this is very easily demonstrated. If you see, and
the other side of that is that if a woman does quote unquote manly things, she's pretending.
Pretending what?
To be as good as a man.
Oh, to try and, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
I think you can really see this demonstrated. Look at Ellen DeGeneres on her talk show. She typically she'll wear kind of like a shirt with a tie, a button-up shirt, a tie, and a blazer. And she looks super cool, I think.
Yeah, she does.
I like her style. That's way more acceptable than if, a man got on TV with a talk show and wore a dress every day.
Right.
Now, one of them is not worse or even really different from the other. But we have a very deeply ingrained cultural reaction to the man wearing a dress versus the woman wearing the quote man's suit, because it's not as bad for a woman to be like a man as it is for a man to be like a woman.
Exactly.
And even Donna's the first example, women with a woman with a shaved head and a muscular body, and I think we've seen that in science fiction movies, and there's no, they're not protesting and picketing, religious folks are not protesting about it. But if there was a hero who was a man who happened to have the appearance or dress as a woman, then this movie would be, banned throughout churches and Christian circles. So it's kind of interesting when you think about how just the little ways that that discrepancy plays out. I think it would be amazing if we didn't care so much about gender expression. If it could just be something where, I think this looks good and I think it looks good on me, so I'm going to do it. This hairstyle, this piece of clothing, makeup or not. I think it'd be amazing if we could just do what we all wanted to do without that expression being so linked to who we must be as a gender-wise, I guess.
Yep, I completely agree.
So we're not there yet. Maybe someday. April asks, the first time I saw your picture, I was really...
You're missing Donna's second question.
Oh, sorry. Donna goes on to say...
You hate Donna. Daniel,
No!
Why do you hate Donna? And you apparently hate Daniel, too, because you missed his second question.
Yeah, I must get better at reading words. Donna goes on to say, do you think gay people can be pansexual, assuming that one can be attracted to a specific sex, but can develop deep feelings with the alternative sex/genders?
The quick and dirty answer to this is that I don't think sexuality is, one, as binary, or two, as concrete as most people think it is. People's sexual orientation, I know people whose sexual orientation has fluctuated. And I mean, my own, to some degree, I don't know if it has actually fluctuated, or if I was just uncovering different parts of myself that I didn't recognize before, which I guess there's an important, philosophical distinction to be made there, but I don't know if it matters in a practical sense. But I mean, I know people who are like, I've just assumed myself to be straight most of my life, and then all of a sudden I realized that I was attracted to men, or attracted to women, whoever it is. And as per usual, trans people throw a wrench way into this sort of thing, because I know a person who I have a very, very loving relationship with. I won't go into too many details, but her feelings she never in her life thought of herself as anything but heterosexual. But when I transition, she still very much sees me as a woman, but her attraction to me and her love for me hasn't changed. So does that mean that her sexuality has changed? That her sexuality is fluid? That, maybe her sexuality just wasn't what she thought it was? Those are all great questions, and I'm not sure that it's really possible to answer in any solid or concrete way. I'll just throw it out there. Most of my life, before transition, I always thought of myself as a straight guy, and I just sort of defaulted like, well, I'm still really attracted to women, so like I'm a gay woman, and that's cool. And then I found myself like, wow, like I'm actually kind of attracted to guys now. And then I had somewhat of a sexual experience with a guy and didn't enjoy it. And I don't know if that was because of him, or if that was because of, all of these things in my head being in theory and not in reality. I don't really know what all of that's about, So, I definitely think a person can totally see themselves as gay their entire life, but all of a sudden you meet this person who you fall in love with them as a person, and you find out like, wow, maybe gender and sex doesn't necessarily matter to me as much as I thought I did, or as I thought I did. And I think that's totally okay. So, things like that can and do happen. I think they're probably the exception rather than, it happening all the time. I would never definitely say to a gay person like, oh, you just think you're gay because you haven't met the right woman yet. That's just an awful thing to say to somebody.
Yeah, it's a stupid thing to say to someone.
But, I know people who things like that have happened to, so I'm not going to say that it doesn't happen.
I think that if you feel that you want to explore different realms of sexuality or gender, that there's probably a good reason why you want to do it in the first place. And whether or not it turns out that you confirm it, or you try it out and you just realize it wasn't for you, I think it's good to try it out if you feel led to do it. If you're a gay person saying, well, I don't want to identify as pansexual, but I had this experience that I don't think I would have had as a gay person, does that mean I'm pansexual? Don't worry so much about what label fits you, because maybe you're just different from most other people, and that's fine. If you explore it and then you find that that you awaken something new, that's great. If you explore it and then you realize that you just confirmed that it's not for you, that's fine too. There's not a losing end to either way.
Yeah, Google the Kinsey scale. For anyone listening who doesn't know what that is, Google the Kinsey scale. And the Kinsey scale is basically a measure of sexual orientation that leaves room in the middle. So like I think it's 1 to 5, and I can't remember if like 1 is totally straight and 5 is totally gay or the other way around. But they ask you a bunch of questions and you rate yourself on the Kinsey scale. So you say like, you're predominantly heterosexual, but more than incidentally homosexual. Or, neither homosexual nor heterosexual, those kinds of things. So, it's still probably not a perfect measurement because obviously, you're not gonna, you're not, unless you're a supercomputer built to, built to find the answer to the ultimate question of the life, the universe, and everything. You're probably not going to boil human experience down to numbers. You know what I mean? Yeah. So no measure is ever going to be perfect. Right. But I think it at least leaves room for, gay, straight, bi.
Sure, and
they're being more than just that.
Yeah, and I think it might be a good introduction to that concept. But and I'm sure you agree with this, Callie, that the actual experience of sexuality is pretty much a spectrum that has no, we can put markers in at certain points, but there's always there have to be just limitless manifestations of this in people, as well as with right. gender. And then when you combine this spectrum of gender with the spectrum of sexuality, you get this really rich kind of worldview of what's possible with people, and I think that's a wonderful thing.
Yep, I couldn't agree more.
All right, do we have time to do more?
Yeah, let's do April's, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll come back and do the rest.
Okay.
Because the last question is about being an ally, so we'll just kind of make that the ally segment. But yeah, we'll do a break here where we normally would for ally, and we'll come back and finish out the rest of the questions. These are great questions, and I'm not going to cut the episode short to not answer them. Cool. So,
all right. April asks, the first time I saw your picture, I was really shocked, Callie. I had heard you speak a bunch of times, both on your own podcast and on a bunch of others, and you talk like you should be much, much older than your picture suggests you are. So are you just super educated and smart, or do you have access to Fountain of Youth water through your kitchen faucet?
Daniel and I use video so we can see each other when we record, and he's currently viewing my head grow several orders of magnitude larger. I mean, thank you for saying that.
That's very sweet.
Yeah. Honestly, I think what it comes down to is I have a gift for communication. If there's and I'll start by saying, if there's anything that annoys me more than an undeserved sense of like arrogance, it's false modesty. So you're never gonna hear me saying like, oh, it's no big deal, there's really I'm not special, I'm not going to do that, because that just comes across as super disingenuous to me when people do that. Honestly, I think, if I have a gift or a talent, it's communication. And I think that's why it made sense to do the podcast, and why I kind of feel like a jackass that it didn't dawn on me earlier that a podcast would be a good thing for me to do. But I mean, the other side of it is I don't generally speak about things unless I have researched them to death. I generally know my stuff, and I make a very, very concerted effort to not have opinions about things that I don't know my stuff about. I don't have any college degrees or anything like that. I mean, I have, certifications for audio production and stuff like that, but, I don't have college degrees or any of that kind of stuff. I just, these are issues that I care about and that I'm super passionate about, and I've done my homework, and, combine that with, a gift for communication. And that's, I think that's why I come across the way that I do. I'm 30, by the way, if that counts for anything.
Yeah, I can attest that you are an excellent communicator, and a communicator, and you're also very good at talking. And I think there's I found doing this podcast that there's a big difference between typing ideas and speaking them into a microphone, because I always thought that I was pretty good at at writing, but then I found out that speaking is an entire different thing, a whole different animal. But you're very good at speaking and articulating your thoughts and unpacking them in a way that's easy to understand. So,
well, thank you. I try. Thank you. Well, and that was a conversation I had with David Smalley from Dogma Debate when we were talking about putting the show on Secular Media Network. He said, I'd love to hear a pilot, but, keeping in mind that having good ideas and being able to say awesome things does not necessarily translate into good radio. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And, making that pilot was a very big learning experience in that direction. I can write a blog entry and, be super proud of, what the blog entry says and how I express myself and everything. And, writing your thought, like you said, writing your thoughts down as, it's almost not even in the same universe as talking out loud. But, I figured I like having conversations with people, and, having a podcast is a little different than just having a conversation. But, that's kind of what it is at the root of things. So, it's a medium that suits my personality. We'll put it that way.
Very good.
All right. So we are going to take one last break, and we will be right back with the Gaytheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network.
I'm Daniel Radcliffe, and I believe that reaching out for help is the bravest thing a person can do. If you are struggling and need support, call the Trevor Lifeline at 1-866-488-7386. It's free and confidential, and trained counselors are there to listen 24/7 without judgment. To learn more about the Trevor Project's life-saving work for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or questioning young people, go to thetrevorproject.org.
Visit secularmediagroup.com to see how we're changing the world.
And we are back on the Gaytheist Manifesto. Today we are continuing with Gaytheist AMA. Whole bunch of awesome questions, blah, blah, blah. You've heard me say this a bunch of times. Daniel, what do we got next?
Jeremiah asks, even when a trans person, quote, transitions and does the sex change surgery, do they still experience gender dysphoria? I was under the impression that dysphoria was caused by the disconnect between perceived assigned at birth sex and the person's gender. If they don't, does that mean they are no longer trans? What if a person has had such a successful transition that they are able to, quote, pass and nobody misgenders them?
So, this is another time where I want to be super careful and say that when I'm answering this question, I'm answering specifically for myself, because my guess is that you would ask 10 different trans people this question and get 10 different kinds of answers. Yeah. But speaking for me, dysphoria is caused by the disconnect between, and I wouldn't even necessarily say that it's the disconnect between perceived or assigned birth at sex and your gender. It's just more that your body doesn't match what your brain thinks it should be, I guess is the more basic way to put it. And surgery and transition and hormones and all of those kinds of things do ease that dysphoria. Will it cure it entirely? My guess would be that for most people, the answer is no. When it comes to, when it's like, a cure? Is it a cure in the fact that you don't ever feel dysphoria ever anymore? I would say the majority of the time the answer to that is probably no. Does it ease dysphoria, make it easier to deal with, make it less of a concern, make it almost not a concern? Yeah, definitely. Anyone I know who has had any sort of transition-related surgery, hormones, any of that kind of stuff that they've felt they needed, they've said that, yes, this makes me feel better in my own skin. It makes me feel more comfortable. I'm happier, more comfortable with myself. But, there are always things that, there are things that surgeries and hormones and stuff can't change. I still have broad shoulders. I'm still taller than the average woman. I still have big hands. Those kinds of things surgery can't fix. And I'm just going to have to learn to live with those things, even though they bother me. It's not always necessarily about, being able to pass and no one ever misgendering you, although that's nice, being misgendered sucks. But even if you're able to quote unquote pass and no one ever misgenders you and stuff like that, it's still, there are still things to deal with, although, they're definitely eased by surgeries and hormones and stuff like that for people who seek that kind of thing.
So there was another aspect of his question that I'm trying to see if I can figure out what he means when he said, if they don't, does that mean they are no longer trans? And I think that he's asking if the dysphoria disappears. Is that what he's saying? If the dysphoria no longer occurs, does that mean they're no longer trans?
Well, right. And I would say implicit in that question would be that the idea that you have to feel dysphoria to be trans, and not all trans people necessarily do feel physical dysphoria. Or, not all trans people feel it bad enough to do anything about it. Mm-hmm. Some people, it's just about their outward presentation or their name or the pronouns people use for them, and they don't pursue any sort of physical transition.
Yeah.
And that's definitely not an invalidation to their identity. But I've heard people say that, once they pursue transition to the degree that they want it, once they've had, hormones if they want them, surgeries if they want them, that kind of thing, everything that they feel they need to transition, that they don't call themselves trans anymore because they're no longer crossing that gender or sex gap. They've arrived. And we could quibble over the definition of the word transgender. The definition that I always use is someone who doesn't identify with your birth assigned sex, and your birth assigned sex is out of your control. The idea being that you are not what people labeled you. If we want to go by that definition, if you are a trans person, you are always trans, unless you recognize that you do, in fact, identify with your assigned at birth sex. If people don't want to call themselves trans anymore because they've transitioned to the degree that they want to, I don't have a problem with that. I'm not going to tell somebody oh, you should claim this thing that you don't feel fits you anymore. That would be pretty aggressive. I wouldn't appreciate that. But, there are definitely people who do that. I don't think I'll ever consider myself not trans once I've finished pursuing transition to the degree that I want it. Because, the fact is that all of the things that I've done in pursuit of transition, in struggling with my identity, struggling with who I am, those things are a part of me, and they'll be part of me for the rest of my life. And, there are lots of important experiences there that I wouldn't want to erase by not claiming that. But that's because I've had a lot of good experiences. A lot of people don't have good experiences, and they would rather forget that transition ever happened. And, as far as they're concerned, their life begins the day that they finish transition to the degree that they want it. And I'm not going to quarrel with somebody over that.
Cool. Jeremiah had a second question that says, I see lots of, quote, sketchy identities like otherkin, identifying as a non-human, or demisexual, feeling sexual attraction only after forming a bond with the other person. They seem to want to cling to the LGBT community, even though they don't seem quite legitimate to me. Even if they are real things, I really don't understand how they are LGBT. It seems to me to be seeking attention and persecution. That being said, that is a statement commonly leveled at LGBT persons, and I don't want to be like the homophobes I have to deal with. What are your thoughts?
So as above, the otherkin, like people identifying as non-human, like I said, I'm immediately skeptical. I'm not going to shout somebody down over it because I don't know if there's research for that. That's not something that I can really speak to. As far as, demisexual, asexual, that kind of stuff, that's definitely a real thing. There are people who don't feel sexual attraction, or people for whom sexual attraction is contingent on an emotional bond with somebody. And, I think those things very much fit with LGBT. And here's why. As far as I can see it, all forms of queer and trans discrimination are gender-based. Mm-hmm. And when queer and or trans people are punished for being queer and or trans people, it's because they've stepped outside of whatever their perceived gender role is supposed to be. So, a man allowing himself to be penetrated like a woman, or a man penetrating another man instead of a woman, or, the list goes on. And, people being, demisexual, asexual, those kinds of things, as a gendered person, you're supposed to feel sexual attraction. And if you don't, people, think you're a freak. And I think those things still fit. I know a person who identifies as demisexual, and I've spent some time talking with her about it, because it's not an experience that I necessarily understand, because I'm a highly sexual person. But I don't want to, invalidate someone else's experience because I don't understand it. So, find somebody who identifies as that thing and ask them bunches of questions. It's definitely a thing, and I think it fits specifically for that reason.
Yeah, and to Jeremiah, and also to anyone else who finds themselves saying this, there was a part of this question that said, "It seems to me to be seeking attention and persecution." I really think this rarely ever happens. I don't think people go out seeking persecution, because persecution does not feel good. So if that's your knee-jerk reaction,
it definitely does. It definitely does happen, because religious people do it all the time.
Okay, that's true. But I think that they're finding persecution as something that they already are, versus I think what Jeremy was saying, where they're adhering to a specific community just to get that persecution experience. Yeah, I'd probably leave that worry out of the whole experience equation. Persecution, or, perceived or real, comes through in their actions. And you can tell that someone's, if they're seeking persecution, look at the fruits, look at the actions, and it's usually pretty easy to make that determination. But I think it's probably not a good idea to say that someone is identifying with a certain group just because they want attention and to be persecuted. Even if it does happen, it's probably something that people are blamed for doing way more often than is actually happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially maybe if you have, a younger teenager or something like that hasn't entered the world claiming to be persecuted before it's even possible for them to really know what persecution feels like, maybe that kind of thing. Because I remember, in school, people were like, I'm dyeing my hair black because I want to shock people, but I'm really pissed when people are shocked. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
Stuff like that does happen, but I definitely think that would not be a necessarily appropriate knee-jerk reaction for that to happen. I would have to see evidence of that actually happen before I was ready to tell somebody that I thought that's what they were doing.
Yeah, fair point. Melissa asks, how would you best explain the feeling of gender dysphoria and gender euphoria to a cis ally, or in general? I'm still trying to find the best way to do it.
Okay, so gender dysphoria. The best way that I found to do it, and I'm going to find this stupid poem and link it in the show notes, because I reference it all the time and I always forget to look up what the title is. But in the course of the poem, the poet's name is Ali, if memory serves, and they're a non-binary person. But the idea is, imagine you woke up one day and had a penis attached to your elbow. That's kind of a funny thing to say, but think for a second about how actually wrong that would feel, and how desperate you would be for that thing to not be there anymore, and how you wouldn't want anyone to see it because this isn't, this isn't supposed to be here. Just sort of imagine yourself in that scenario, and I think you've probably come at least some degree closer to understanding what dysphoria feels like.
Maybe sometimes when I think about this, I think that if you're a cis guy trying to figure out dysphoria, maybe think about what you would feel like if you woke up tomorrow with a vagina and breasts. How would you feel?
Right.
How would that make you feel when who you are, your experience of being a man is still happening in your brain, like that probably wouldn't feel right.
Right, and that's the internal stuff. And the external stuff, I mean, just imagine as your average cis male, how awkward you would feel if you went out in public wearing a dress and heels and makeup. Yeah. Just imagine how awkward you would feel doing that. And again, that's, sort of how awkward it feels to be doing it the wrong way for trans people. And as far as gender euphoria goes, imagine the relief you feel when those things go back to the way they should be.
Well said.
So, I think that's kind of the way to bring it back around. Those are really the best ways that I've found to describe it. I mean, like as said before, I don't think there's ever going to be a perfect way to really make people understand, but I mean, that's definitely the best way that I've thought. I'm definitely open to input if there's a better way to put it, but those are definitely the best things that I've been able to think of.
Yeah. And I think you're right about it. It's something that if you don't live it, there's really no way to imagine it, except through analogies. But it definitely seems like something unique to trans people, the gender aspect of gender dysphoria.
Right. And so the next question I'm going to read this next question because it was actually just part of a conversation that I had with my friend Kayla, not previous friend Kayla who asked the question earlier in the show. But we were talking and she asked me what I thought about people who use the label genderqueer but don't seem to do anything about it, who don't pursue any sorts of transition, don't, pick a new name or ask people to use they, them, their pronouns or that kind of thing. Is that a valid thing, or is that people trying to appropriate the label? And honestly, that's a really, really tough thing for me to call, because again, probably 99% of the time, I'm going to err on the side of not challenging someone's identity. Again, just because it's happened to me and people that I know so often, I would rather mistakenly let someone appropriate an identity than risk calling someone out, when there's something legit going on. That being said, I mean, I've heard people say, like, I'm a guy and I like vacuuming and cooking, therefore I have gender issues. And I just think to myself, like, I mean, is that really an identity problem?
Yeah, don't confuse gender roles, which are arbitrary, to gender identity. Again, just because you like to do things that are usually attributed to women, those could reverse at any time. And within a generation, they would be called, what was once called women's work could be called man's work. It really is just an arbitrary societal thing. So,
right. So, when it comes down to it, I'm not gonna challenge somebody on it typically, but I mean, it is definitely something to be cognizant of. And, one thing that I would say is, just think good and hard about the way that you feel before you do something like that, to make sure that you're not inappropriately appropriating, someone else's experience as your own. If somebody tells me, like, yeah, I've put a lot of thought into this, it's something that I've really struggled with, and this is what I came out with, typically I'm not going to challenge that, because that's kind of a messed up thing to do. But I would just say, please at least do that.
Okay.
And I would probably have to leave it there.
Very good.
So Danielle, my friend Danielle, asked, to wrap this whole thing up, as a heterosexual cis female, what can I do to be the best ally possible? And of course, anyone who listens to the show knows that be a better ally is kind of our thing, because it's really the only thing that's stayed pretty consistent in every episode since we started. So allyship is a really, really super complicated thing. The first thing that I would say is, as an ally, you need to recognize your privilege. I'm constantly doing that to myself in conversations about race and, how I as a white person can best support people in their efforts towards racial justice and racial equality. So I would say, when you're speaking with trans people or with gay people about what you can do, the first thing to recognize is your own privilege and how that comes into play in your own experience. And the next thing is to listen to and validate the lived experiences of the people that you're trying to be an ally for. So when someone says, hey, this is a thing that happens to me and this is how I feel about it, the knee-jerk reaction shouldn't be to say, well, I don't believe that. The knee-jerk reaction should be, oh my gosh, okay, so this is a thing, explain to me how this works, or, something like that. Another good thing to do being an ally is to not obligate people in those communities to be your educator. Obviously I do these things because it's my thing. It's something that I've invited and it's something that I want to do. So it's something that I'm happy to do. So, this isn't, me being accusatory towards anyone who, sent questions into the show or anything, because obviously we asked for this. This is what we want. But I would say don't obligate people in those communities to educate you. Use the internet as a resource. Just listen to what people say. And, if you have questions and stuff like that, I would say ask permission to ask questions and say, hey, as a straight person, here's some stuff I don't understand. Is it okay for me to ask you these questions, or would you rather not talk about it, or something along those lines? That stuff's appropriate. People have done that to me all the time, and I really appreciate that. I'm generally a person who never has a problem answering questions like that. So, but there are lots of people who, that stuff can get exhausting, because if your day to day is a struggle and you're just trying to survive, the last thing you want to do is be, Trans 101 educator. And I get that. So that's kind of some baseline stuff as far as being an ally. And then aside from that, just making sure that you let people, know, one, that you believe them when they say they experience these things, that, their feelings about these experiences are valid, and that you care. Not that you can fix it, or that you can make things better, or you can necessarily make anyone feel better, but just that you care, and that it's a thing that matters to you. And I think that's really the basics. We're going to do an episode on allyship later on towards Ally Week in October. So definitely look out for more on that. And that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network. I want to say thank you to my co-host Daniel, and you can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at GaytheistCali. Daniel is on Twitter at Daniel Wolfsong, and you can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheists. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, if you're hurting, if you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, and knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.